The transport vessel descended through the turbulent green clouds of Varka 4, its hull trembling from the dense atmosphere below. Inside, cadets of 9 alien species sat strapped in silence, each of them surrounded by the faint hum of their own life support units. The air reeked of fear and metal. The Galactic Survival Academy had promised that this would be their final test, one that would separate instinct from dependency, strength from technology. But few understood what no tools, no fire, no help truly meant until they saw the endless ocean of forest stretching beneath them. It was alive, breathing, shifting as if the planet itself waited for them. Among the cadets sat Aaron Holt, the only human in the group. His expression was calm, almost detached, as he listened to the others whispering through translator devices. The insectoid twins from Taucrix clicked nervously, their carapaces twitching. The tall reptilian student from Ors Vash hissed softly through his mask, muttering about how their claws would freeze without exosuit heating. To them, the word survival meant endurance supported by equipment, sensors, and algorithms. For Aaron, it meant something entirely different. When the ship's door opened, the sound that came through was not wind. It was breathing. The forest below exhaled hot, moist air mixed with the scent of decay and minerals. Massive trees stretched toward the lightless sky, their roots so thick they formed bridges over rivers of mist. The cadets hesitated at the threshold, but Aaron stepped forward without a word, feeling the ground yield softly under his boots. He squatted down and pressed a palm into the soil. It was damp, rich with life, and humming faintly with electricity from the planet's constant storms. He smiled to himself. This was not hostile terrain, it was simply honest. The instructor's voice echoed from a hovering drone. Remember the rule. No tools, no fire, no help. Your survival will be your language. The message ended, and the drone vanished into the canopy, leaving only the sound of insect calls and shifting leaves. The aliens immediately began debating strategy. The amphibians wanted to find water, the avians wanted to climb for a vantage point, and the reptilians wanted to find a cave and seal themselves in. Aaron didn't argue. He simply took a slow walk around the landing zone, studying how the light filtered through the leaves, where the moss grew thickest, and which insects followed his movement. Every detail mattered. The others soon noticed that he wasn't panicking. One of the Taucrix twins, her mandibles clicking in irritation, shouted through the translator, "You act as if you've been here before, human. Do you not feel the danger?" Aaron looked at her and said softly, "Danger is just something you haven't named yet." He didn't explain further, and she didn't ask again. By sunset, the group had tried to build a camp. The reptilians used broken branches, but without cutting tools, their shelters collapsed under their own weight. The amphibians smeared mud to make walls, only to watch the moisture attract swarms of biting insects. The avians perched in the trees, hoping elevation would save them. But the forest canopy was alive with predators that hunted by heat. The first scream came when a student from Vor fell into a tangle of roots that closed around his leg like a fist. It took 4 cadets to pull him out, his suit torn, his translator sparking. Fear spread instantly, as if the forest had inhaled it from their lungs. The sky turned deep violet, and the first droplets of acid dew began to fall. Panic followed. "We must call extraction!" one shouted, clutching the comm band on his wrist. But the device gave only static. The ban on technology wasn't just a rule, it was enforced. Every digital signal was jammed by the Academy's orbital oversight. Aaron, instead of hiding, walked toward a cluster of fallen trees. He examined the bark, testing its strength, feeling the texture between his fingers. He picked up a length of fibrous vine, pulled at it gently, and nodded when it held. Then he broke off a piece of rough stone and began scraping. Sparks of thought flickered in his mind. Shapes, tools, the rhythm of survival. He began twisting the vine into a cord, his hands moving with instinctual memory. The sound of others arguing blurred behind him. He listened instead to the forest, The hiss of sap boiling inside trunks, the drumming of distant thunder, the strange rhythm of nocturnal life emerging. "What are you doing?" a voice hissed behind him. It was the reptilian cadet, scales gleaming faintly in the fading light. Aaron didn't look up. "Preparing." "For what? We have no fire, no weapons, no scanners. We'll die before dawn." Aaron smiled faintly. "Then we don't need any of those things, do we?" The reptilian blinked, confused, but said nothing more. Aaron continued working until he had enough vine for a few meters of rope. He used the rough edge of a broken branch to test the strength, pulling with his weight until it held firm. Then he tied it between two trees, a small boundary marker, a way to orient himself. He didn't need power. He needed awareness. When the night deepened, the others huddled close, whispering through failing translators. The human sat alone, watching the glowing fungi bloom across the ground like fallen stars. The air was thick with noise, distant roars, insect wings like blades, and the rhythmic pulse of the forest's core. Yet amid that chaos, Aaron felt peace. He thought of Earth, the sound of rain on leaves, the crack of branches, the way fire once smelled before metal replaced wood. He had grown up in forests not unlike this one. Every sound had meaning, every silence a warning. When a branch snapped somewhere nearby, he didn't reach for a weapon. He listened. Then, using the cord he'd made, he set a simple perimeter alarm, a vine loop that would rattle stones if disturbed. It wasn't much, but it was thought turned physical. The others didn't sleep. Fear had hollowed them out, leaving them trembling shadows of cadets who once bragged about evolution and superiority. In the morning, they would discover that while they had survived the night, the human had lived it. The dawn came without light, only a thinning of the mist. Aaron woke before the others, stretching quietly. His rope was intact, his marker untouched. The forest had respected him, or perhaps just watched him. Either way, there was an understanding now. He wasn't prey. He walked to the edge of the clearing and picked up two stones, one dark and glassy, the other pale and brittle. He tapped them together, listening to the sound, then smiled when he felt the fracture line forming under his thumb. It wasn't luck. It was geometry. Behind him, the first cadet stirred, complaining of cold and hunger. The insectoid's shells were streaked with dew. The reptilian scales had dulled from the chill. One of them shouted at him again, "Human, what are you doing?" Aaron held up the stone, the edge now sharp as a blade. "I'm learning the language of the forest," he said. "You just have to listen long enough for it to answer." The others didn't understand him yet, but by the end of the trial, they would. For now, as the mist coiled through the roots and the sun fought to pierce the green horizon, Aaron Holt stood quietly among them, unarmed, unafraid, and already one step ahead of every species that had ever thought humanity primitive. The second day on Varka 4 began in heavy silence. Mist clung to the trees like gauze, and the air pulsed with the distant rhythm of unseen creatures stirring from the night. The alien cadets awoke scattered and shivering, their makeshift shelters sagging, their translators clicking weakly from moisture damage. The reptilian cadet from Universehfy was the first to break the quiet, his voice sharp with accusation as he pointed toward Aaron. "You are too calm, human. You act as though this place belongs to you. What are you hiding?" Aaron looked up from where he crouched, tying a new section of vine rope. His expression did not change. "Calm doesn't mean safe," he said. "It just means I'm listening." He stood, scanning the tree line. The forest hummed faintly, alive with motion, but distant. Something had shifted overnight, some subtle balance disturbed. The insectoid twins from Taucrix were chittering in low tones, their antennae twitching nervously. One of them held a piece of decayed fruit that oozed an acidic slime. She hissed, dropping it, as it burned her lower claws. "The food here kills," she said through her translator, her voice laced with panic. "The water burns. How are we meant to survive?" The avian student above them let out a shriek. "We should climb higher! Get out of the ground fog before it poisons us!" But before she could launch herself from her perch, the branch she stood on trembled and then collapsed under its own weight, hollowed by something inside. She hit the ground hard, her wings folding awkwardly. Aaron was already there, pulling her up. "Don't move," he said softly. "The branch was eaten from within. Look." He pointed to the splintered interior, now crawling with pale worms that dissolved the wood. The aliens stepped back in horror. "Everything here consumes," Aaron said. "Even the air wants to feed, so we'll stop giving it what it wants." His tone was steady, almost detached, but his mind was racing. The forest wasn't just dangerous, it was intelligent in its hunger. It responded to motion, vibration, even fear. He could feel the pattern forming in his head, an instinct honed through thousands of generations on Earth's own death worlds. While the others muttered, Aaron began collecting the things that no one else noticed: the discarded skins of fruit, the shed bark, the glossy leaves with water pooled inside them. He tested each one, sniffing, touching, watching reactions. Some corroded instantly, others remained inert. One of the insectoid twins approached him cautiously. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Sorting life from death," he said. She tilted her head. "By smell? By patience." He smiled faintly. "It's a human tool." By midday, the heat began to rise, and the mist grew thinner. The cadets gathered near the clearing again, desperate and irritable. The reptilian snapped at a smaller amphibian for spilling a pouch of filtered water, while the avian cursed at her torn wing. It was disunity, panic transforming into hostility. Aaron watched quietly. Panic, he knew, was more dangerous than any predator here. "We need leadership," the reptilian said, his voice rising. "We follow the strongest. I have combat ranking. You all do as I say." He bared his teeth, his scales reflecting dull sunlight. Aaron didn't challenge him directly. Instead, he turned away and began to climb a slanted trunk nearby, his movements deliberate and unhurried. "You want to survive?" he asked without looking down. "Then stop shouting. You're making yourself dinner." The reptilian froze. The forest around them had gone unnaturally quiet, the kind of silence that presses against the skull. Even the fog seemed to pull back. Then came the sound, slow, dragging, heavy. Something large was moving through the undergrowth. The cadets looked toward the sound, trembling. Aaron stayed still, crouched on the trunk, watching with cold focus. When the creature broke through the ferns, it wasn't what anyone expected. It was a long-bodied predator, low to the ground, with translucent skin that shimmered in patches of green and violet. Its eyes were a deep amber, intelligent and patient. It didn't lunge, it watched. The reptilian took a step back, trembling, his claws flexing uselessly. "Weapons!" he shouted, but no one moved. "No tools!" one of the amphibians reminded him weakly. "That was the rule." Aaron's voice cut through the chaos. "Stay still." His tone carried weight, and somehow the others obeyed. He slowly untied the vine from his waist and dropped it to the ground. He picked up a branch, a thick, crooked piece of dead wood, and pressed one end into the soil, testing its balance. The predator took another step closer, sniffing the air, tasting fear. Aaron planted the stick upright and waited. The beast circled once, then stopped beside the branch, curious. Aaron's eyes followed its breathing, slow, measured, rhythmic. He adjusted his own, syncing the pattern. The forest exhaled again. The predator blinked once, twice, and then turned, vanishing silently into the foliage. Only when the sound had faded did Aaron speak again. "It's not about killing," he said. "It's about understanding what kills you and what doesn't need to." The silence that followed was thick. Even the reptilian said nothing. The avian, still trembling from her fall, looked at Aaron with wide eyes. "How did you know it wouldn't attack?" she asked. Aaron looked at her calmly. "I didn't," he said. but I knew that fear would make it curious. He walked past them, kneeling beside a cluster of stones. Using the sharp edge of the flaked shard he had made the night before, he began cutting small grooves into the rock, shaping them. The others gathered around, drawn by his focus. "What are you making?" the insectoid asked. "A way to think," he replied. "Hands remember what minds forget." By afternoon, the group had settled into an uneasy rhythm under his quiet direction. The amphibians gathered vines, the avians fetched leaves that did not corrode, and the insectoids learned how to twist the fibers into strands strong enough to bear weight. Aaron showed them how to anchor them between trees, creating crude hammocks to keep them off the acid ground. He didn't command, he demonstrated. Slowly, the panic that had consumed the camp began to fade into a kind of cautious curiosity. But peace was fragile. As the sun dipped low and shadows stretched long, a new threat came. The shrill sound of approaching flight. Dozens of small creatures, glowing like embers, swarmed from the forest canopy. They weren't birds or insects, but something in between, their bodies pulsing with heat. The first one struck a vine, burning through it like acid fire. The cadets screamed, scattering. Aaron grabbed a broad leaf and swung it downward, the air hissing as it deflected one of the creatures. "Light repels heat," he muttered to himself. He turned toward the insectoid twins. "Those glowing mushrooms, bring as many as you can." They obeyed without hesitation. Within moments, he had arranged a rough perimeter of luminescent caps, placing them in a ring around the camp. The swarm hesitated, flickered uncertainly, and then veered away, dispersing back into the trees. The forest fell silent once more. One of the amphibians stared at the glowing circle around them. "You protected us," he said softly. Aaron looked at the ring, then at the faces around him. "No," he said. "We protected ourselves. I just reminded you how." That night, no one argued. The cadets sat together beneath the enormous trees, surrounded by the faint blue glow of the mushrooms. The forest still whispered and shifted, but the fear had changed flavor. It was no longer paralyzing. It was a teacher's shadow. Aaron leaned back against a trunk, his eyes half closed, listening to the alien night. He thought about how easily the others had broken when their technology was stripped away. He wondered what it said about the galaxy that so many species had forgotten the simplest truths of survival. Above them, the orbiting instructors watched through thermal feeds, recording everything. One of them whispered into a comm line, "The human leads them without rank or command. He bends chaos to cooperation. This wasn't supposed to happen." Down below, Aaron felt the wind shift again, bringing the scent of rain and the promise of another test. He smiled faintly, the muscles around his eyes tightening. "Let's see what else you've got, Varka," he murmured. The forest rustled in reply, as if it accepted his challenge. The rain began at dawn. It didn't fall gently like earth rain. It hissed as it touched the ground, dissolving the upper layer of soil into a steaming haze. The tracks were still there, long, deep, and perfectly symmetrical, as though the animal had been carved out of the ground rather than stepped upon it. The air smelled faintly metallic. He crouched down, brushed his fingers over one of the prints, and felt the faint tremor beneath it. The predator hadn't left the area. It was watching. Aaron didn't call attention to it. He simply made a note in his head of which trees leaned toward the tracks and which vines had been disturbed. Observation was safety. Panic was death. Behind him, the reptilian cadet approached, his scales darker now from the humidity. "You keep wandering off," he hissed, his tongue flicking in irritation. "We should be building defenses, not playing with stones." Aaron straightened slowly and turned to face him. "Defenses fall apart if you don't understand what you're defending against," he said. The reptilian crossed his arms, clearly unimpressed. "You talk as if the forest listens." Aaron studied him for a moment before replying. "It does. You just haven't learned its language." The reptilian gave a snort, muttered something in his native tongue, and stomped away. Aaron didn't mind. Leadership wasn't about being liked. It was about making others stop thinking like victims. He continued to gather materials, selecting certain types of bark that resisted the rain and a stone that had fractured into smooth shards. He carried them back to camp where the others were already stirring. The avian with the injured wing was sitting near the fireless pit, watching him. Her feathers were dull from the damp, but her eyes were alert. "You found something?" she asked. "Something better than shelter," he replied. He placed the stones in front of him, arranged them by shape and density, and began to strike them together carefully. Each blow was deliberate. Small flakes chipped away, scattering across the ground like glass dust. The others gathered, watching as the dull edges sharpened into clean lines. The reptilian returned just in time to see Aaron hold up a newly formed tool, a perfect razor-edged flake of volcanic glass. It caught the pale morning light, glinting cold and bright. "A weapon," the reptilian said, his tone shifting from skepticism to interest. Aaron shook his head. "A tool," he corrected. "Weapons are what you make when you don't know how to use tools properly." He picked up a length of vine, looped it through a hole he'd carved in a branch, and tied it off tightly. Then, with the glass shard set at an angle, he fashioned a crude knife. "This," he said, "is thinking made visible." The insectoid twins exchanged a look, fascinated. One of them reached out a claw but hesitated. "May we try?" she asked. Aaron nodded and handed her the shard. She mimicked his earlier movements, striking one stone against another. Her first attempt shattered the piece completely, but instead of scolding her, Aaron smiled. "Now you know what weakness feels like," he said. "Next time, you'll know what to avoid." She tried again, slower this time, and when the sound of a clean fracture rang through the clearing, her antennae lifted in delight. By noon, the cadets had scattered across the area, each practicing what he had shown. Soon there were piles of chipped stones, ropes of braided vines, and rough-cut spears tipped with makeshift blades. The air was filled with a different kind of energy now, focused, purposeful. Even the reptilian had stopped complaining, testing the sharpness of his newly made blade against a vine. For the first time since the trial began, cooperation replaced fear. Aaron stood a short distance away, watching the transformation. He could almost feel the instructors observing from orbit, their cameras recording every moment. This test had been designed to break them, but it was becoming something else, a lesson in rediscovery. He walked over to the avian, who was now using her beak to smooth a wooden handle. "You see?" he said softly. "Hands remember what minds forget." She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting a hint of awe. "How did your species learn all this?" she asked. He thought for a moment. "Because we had to," he said. "Earth didn't forgive mistakes." A sudden sound cut through the calm, a sharp, high-pitched cry echoing from deeper in the forest. Everyone froze. Aaron's head snapped toward the noise. "Stay here," he ordered quietly. "Don't move until I come back." Before anyone could stop him, he slipped into the undergrowth, moving with the silence of someone who trusted the ground beneath him. The air thickened, and light grew dim. The call came again, weaker this time. He followed it until he reached a clearing where the ground was wet with an iridescent fluid. In the center lay one of the amphibian cadets, her leg trapped under a fallen branch. She was breathing fast, her skin blistered where the acid rain had burned through. Aaron dropped to his knees beside her. "Don't move," he said. He used his knife to cut through the vines binding the branch, then leveraged it up with a smaller branch as support. She gasped in pain but didn't scream. When he freed her, he noticed the burns spreading. Without hesitation, he tore the sleeve from his own uniform and used the fabric to wipe away the acid. Then he reached for a handful of pale moss growing nearby. He had seen it earlier absorbing dew without corroding. Crushing it between his palms, he pressed the pulp onto her wound. The reaction was immediate. The hissing stopped, replaced by a faint, cooling scent like wet earth. She looked at him through wide, trembling eyes. "You saved me," she whispered. He shook his head. "You'll save yourself next time. Watch what I did and remember it." He helped her stand, supporting her as they made their way back to camp. When they emerged from the trees, the others stared in silence. The reptilian stepped forward, his tone softer now. "You risked your life for her." Aaron met his gaze. "That's how life works. You help one, everyone survives longer." The words sank in deeper than he intended. From that moment, the dynamic shifted completely. The cadets stopped looking at him as a stranger or primitive. He had become their anchor. As dusk settled, he gathered them together. "Tomorrow," he said, "we hunt." The reptilian blinked. "Hunt? With these?" He held up his spear doubtfully. Aaron nodded. "Not to kill for sport. To learn what feeds what. To know what we are part of." His eyes moved across each face, making sure the meaning landed. Survival isn't about dominating. It's about belonging. When the group finally lay down to rest, the glowing mushrooms pulsed gently around the camp, casting soft blue light over their tired faces. Aaron sat apart, sharpening his blade against a flat stone. The forest's sounds had changed again, quieter now, more measured. He could feel the shift in the air, a strange recognition from the living world around them. For the first time since their arrival, he didn't feel like an intruder. He glanced up at the stars flickering faintly through the canopy and wondered if the instructors watching above understood what they were witnessing. The test had begun as a measure of discipline, but it had become something else entirely, a rediscovery of what humanity was born from. He looked back at the sleeping cadets, their forms curled under the shelter of the great leaves. The reptilian still clutched his spear even in sleep. The insectoid twins rested side by side, their antennae faintly glowing. The avian slept sitting upright, wings wrapped protectively around her body. The forest hummed softly, a sound like distant breathing. Aaron leaned against the tree trunk and closed his eyes for a moment, his mind clear. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to feel the weight of fatigue, not fear. Above the planet, in the observation vessel, the instructors watched the heat signatures on their monitors. One of them whispered to another, "The human turned a trial into a tribe." The other replied, "He's rewriting the lesson." On the surface, Aaron Holt drifted into sleep, his knife resting across his lap, unaware that the world around him, the forest, the cadets, even the watchers above, had already begun to change because of him. The next morning came with a thick, heavy fog that muted all sound. The forest had gone eerily quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Aaron woke before the others, his instincts stirring him from sleep. The silence wasn't peace, it was warning. He sat up slowly, scanning the dim light filtering through the leaves. Every drop of moisture on the vines trembled slightly, responding to vibrations that his ears couldn't catch but his nerves did. Something was moving nearby, something big. He reached for his knife, checked the sharpness of its edge with his thumb, and listened. The reptilian stirred next, blinking against the faint blue glow of the mushrooms. "Is it morning?" he asked in a low hiss. Aaron nodded. "Stay quiet. The forest's listening." That was enough to silence everyone. One by one, the other cadets woke, sensing the tension in his voice. No one moved, not even the insectoid twins who usually whispered at dawn. The mist thickened until it formed a curtain around them, and then the sound came. Slow, heavy steps, deliberate and rhythmic. The avian's feathers bristled as she whispered, "It's back." Aaron's jaw tightened. The predator from before had returned. He motioned for everyone to stay low. The reptilian gripped his spear, his tail twitching, but Aaron shook his head sharply. "Not yet," he mouthed. "We don't fight unless we must." The steps drew closer until even the ground seemed to pulse with the creature's weight. Then, without warning, the mist parted and the beast appeared again. Its skin glimmered with wet translucence, its eyes a deep molten gold. It was studying them, not attacking, curious, patient, intelligent. Aaron's pulse slowed. He could see it now more clearly than before, a scar running along its side, a wound old and half-healed. It was a hunter, yes, but also a survivor. The reptilian broke first. "We can take it!" he hissed, his muscles coiled to strike. Before he could move, Aaron reached out and gripped his arm hard enough to stop him. "If you kill it," he whispered, "the forest will turn against us. This isn't our enemy." The reptilian glared at him, confused, but the authority in Aaron's voice froze him in place. He turned back toward the creature and slowly crouched, lowering his weapon to the ground. His heartbeat matched the rhythm of the rain still dripping from the canopy. The predator tilted its head, its gaze flicking between him and the others. Then it made a sound, a low rumble that vibrated through the air like a question. Aaron didn't respond with words. He reached into the pouch tied at his waist and pulled out a strip of dried fruit he'd made from the non-toxic plants discovered earlier. He tossed it toward the creature. The predator sniffed it, nudged it with its snout, and then, against all logic, ate it. The reptilian's eyes widened in disbelief. "You're feeding it?" he hissed. Aaron didn't answer. The creature lingered for a few moments longer, then turned and disappeared into the fog. The forest exhaled again. Only then did Aaron speak. "We hunt today," he said, standing. "But we hunt clean. One kill, no waste." The insectoid twins looked uncertain. "You want us to follow it?" one asked. "No," he said. "We follow balance. The forest showed us something just now. It's watching how we act." The words sounded strange even to his own ears, but he believed them. The forest wasn't random chaos. It was a system, ancient and self-regulating. To live here, they had to fit into its pattern, not fight against it. He divided the group quickly. The reptilian, still bristling with adrenaline, would track. His keen senses could read ground vibrations. The insectoid twins would collect edible plants and weave traps. The avian would scout from low altitude, her wings still weak but usable for gliding. The amphibian would handle water filtration and moss collection. Aaron kept himself unassigned. His task was to observe, to keep the rhythm of the group steady. As they moved through the dense terrain, he marked subtle signs, claw marks on trunks, disturbed ferns, broken shells of small creatures. Life here wasn't cruel. It was efficient. Everything fed something else. By midday, the reptilians signaled silently. Tracks, fresh ones, led toward a ravine filled with shallow pools. The cadets fanned out, moving carefully. Aaron crouched beside one of the prints and ran his fingers through the mud. "Herbivore," he whispered. "Soft feet, no claws." He looked at the others. "We take only one. No more." The reptilian frowned but nodded. They waited. The forest pulsed with low, steady sound, and then a shape emerged from the mist, a creature with a thick, armored back, grazing on luminous plants. Its eyes were calm, its movements slow. It wasn't dangerous. Aaron raised his hand, signaling silence. He motioned for the reptilian to circle left, the insectoids to prepare a net, and the avian to stay above in case it bolted. Then he stepped forward slowly, his own spear balanced lightly in his hands. Every muscle in his body was tuned to the creature's rhythm, the way it breathed, the tilt of its head as it chewed. When it turned slightly, he moved. A quick gesture. The vine net fell perfectly across its path. It panicked but didn't charge. The reptilian moved fast, striking behind its legs to trip it, while Aaron darted forward and drove the spear into its neck, clean, deep, and merciful. The creature went still. The forest went silent again, as if acknowledging what had happened. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the amphibian lowered his head. "We killed for life," he said quietly. "Not for pride." Aaron nodded. "Now we show respect." He knelt beside the fallen beast and placed a hand on its hide. "Thank you," he said softly. The others followed his lead. Even the reptilian, once skeptical, bowed his head briefly. Then they set to work, careful and precise. Nothing was wasted. The meat was wrapped in leaves, the bones kept for tools, the hide stretched for shelter. When the job was done, Aaron ordered them to bury the remains. "The forest gave us this," he said. "It should return what's left." That night, the camp smelled of roasted meat for the first time since their arrival. The insectoids worked tirelessly, turning bones into hooks and tools. The avian sat near the fireless warmth pit, her eyes shining in the glow of the bioluminescent mushrooms. "I didn't know humans did this," she said softly. Aaron looked up. "Did what?" "Kill without hate," he shrugged. "We learned it the hard way. When you fight for too long, you start to forget the reason to live. Balance keeps us human." She nodded thoughtfully, watching the others eat. As the group settled into quiet conversation, Aaron moved away, standing at the edge of the clearing. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing a field of distant lights, fireflies, or something like them, drifting among the branches. The forest no longer felt oppressive. It felt alive, aware, and strangely accepting. He could sense the others' spirits lifting too. They had begun to trust him fully, and in doing so, they had started trusting themselves. Far above, in the orbiting observation deck, one of the instructors leaned over a console. "The human taught them ceremony," he said, half in disbelief. He lay down on the damp ground, exhaustion pulling him under. The stars beyond the canopy were dim, but he could feel their presence through the gaps in the leaves. Tomorrow would bring another challenge, but tonight, the forest had given them its blessing. For the first time since the trial began, he felt no tension in his chest, only a quiet sense of belonging. And somewhere far above, unseen by any of them, the instructors recorded every second, realizing that the test had long since changed its purpose. It was no longer measuring strength or obedience. It was documenting the rebirth of something ancient and human. The final dawn on Varka 4 arrived like a whisper. The air was still, the mist thin, and the forest no longer seemed hostile. It pulsed with quiet rhythm, as if it acknowledged what had been learned within its depths. Aaron woke before the others, his body sore but his mind calm. He sat up slowly, watching faint shafts of light slide between the trunks. The fog smelled different that morning, not of acid or decay, but of wet soil and renewal. Around him, the camp slept in harmony, each cadet resting without fear. The ropes held, the shelters stood, and the forest hummed softly like a living heart around them. For the first time since the drop, the silence was peaceful. He rose quietly and walked toward the riverbank where their water traps had been placed. The moss filters still worked perfectly, a small miracle of adaptation. He crouched, splashed his face with the cold water, and let the ripples spread outward. His reflection looked older, his skin dirt-streaked, his beard untrimmed, his eyes steady. The trial had stripped away everything that had once been superficial, leaving only essence. He had not only survived, he had remembered what it meant to belong to a world instead of conquering it. Behind him, footsteps approached. It was the avian cadet, her once tattered feathers now sleek and clean. She smiled faintly, her wing held more confidently. "You don't sleep anymore," she said softly. He looked at her reflection beside his. "Not when the world is this quiet," he replied. "It feels wrong to miss it." She tilted her head. "Do you think the forest will remember us?" He smiled. "I think it already has." He stood and turned back toward the camp. The others were waking now, stretching, speaking in soft tones that no longer carried panic. Even the reptilian, once restless and proud, now spoke with calm authority to the amphibian as they repaired one of the nets. The insectoid twins hummed together while binding leaves into storage sacks. Something profound had changed in them all. The Academy had sent cadets to test endurance, but what emerged was unity, a shared rhythm that transcended species. A distant hum drew Aaron's attention upward. He recognized it immediately, the low mechanical growl of orbital engines descending through the atmosphere. The instructors were coming. The trial had ended. He felt a strange heaviness in his chest as he watched the clouds split open above the treetops. The transport ship appeared like a dark wound against the light. The others noticed it soon after. Some smiled in relief, others looked uncertain. The avian stepped closer to him. "We go home," she said. But Aaron didn't answer. He looked around, the forest, the shelters, the half-buried bones of the creature they had hunted. This place had become more than a battlefield. It had become a teacher. When the ship landed in the clearing, the ground trembled. The instructors emerged, tall, imposing figures in sealed suits that gleamed under the pale sunlight. The lead instructor, a seraphon with mirrored eyes and translucent skin, stepped forward. His voice came through a speaker, amplified and cold. "Cadet Team 397, your trial has concluded. Report for extraction and evaluation." The reptilian straightened, clutching his spear tightly. The avian lowered her gaze. The insectoids exchanged a silent glance. None of them moved. The seraphon's expression shifted slightly, confusion flickering across his alien face. "Do you not understand the order?" Aaron stepped forward. His hands were empty, his expression calm. "We understand," he said evenly. "But the trial didn't end with your signal. It ended when we learned what you forgot." The instructor tilted his head. "Explain." Aaron gestured around them, to the shelters, the woven nets, the moss filters, the respectful burial mound beneath the glowing mushrooms. "You sent us here to prove dominance over environment. You called it survival. But survival isn't domination. It's adaptation. It's respect. We didn't just endure this place. We listened to it. And in return, it accepted us." The seraphon regarded him for a long time. The silence stretched until even the forest seemed to wait. Then he spoke again, his tone quieter. "You broke the rules. Tools were forbidden. Fire was forbidden. Leadership was not assigned." Aaron smiled faintly. "We broke nothing. We only remembered what it means to build from nothing. If your rules forbid that, maybe the rules are the real failure." A murmur passed among the other instructors. The seraphon's gaze lingered on Aaron for several seconds before he finally said, "Step aboard. The council will review your results." Aaron turned to his group. "Gather what matters," he said. The reptilian looked down at his spear, the first he had ever made with his own hands. "This," he said. "It matters." The avian folded a piece of glowing leaf into her pouch. "And this." The insectoid twins picked up their vine nets. The amphibian carried the carved bowl he had made from bone. Each took something born of their effort, not as trophies, but as memories. As they boarded the ship, the forest stirred behind them, a wave of sound rising like a breath of farewell. Aaron turned one last time. In the tree line, half hidden by mist, he saw a pair of golden eyes watching him. The predator stood silent and still, its head slightly lowered. He raised his hand once in acknowledgement. The creature blinked slowly, then disappeared into the fog. Inside the ship, the cadets sat in silence. The hum of engines felt wrong now, too sterile, too smooth. The reptilian glanced out the viewport. "It feels smaller up here," he said quietly. Aaron nodded. "That's because we forgot how big small things can be." The flight back to orbit was brief. When the ramp opened again, the sterile air of the academy flooded their lungs, cold and sharp. Rows of officers waited, their expressions unreadable. The cadets stood at attention, mud still on their uniforms, vines still wrapped around their wrists. The seraphon stepped forward again. "Your scores are incomplete," he said. "The parameters no longer apply." Aaron met his gaze. Maybe that's the point. For several long moments, no one spoke. Then, one by one, the instructors began to applaud, not loudly, not ceremoniously, but with quiet sincerity. The sound echoed through the chamber, hesitant at first, then stronger. The Seraphon inclined his head. "Cadet Aaron Holt," he said, "your report will be recorded as a deviation, an anomaly of exceptional result. You and your team have passed." Aaron nodded once. "We didn't pass," he said softly. "We learned." Weeks later, the footage of their trial circulated across the Academy networks. Other cadets watched in disbelief as the human led alien species, not through command, but through empathy. Debates erupted among instructors, philosophers, and commanders. Some called it regression, primitive sentimentality unfit for the modern galaxy. Others called it evolution in its truest form. But for Aaron, none of that mattered. He had already returned to Earth, back to the forests that had once raised him. He stood one evening on the edge of a clearing much like the one on Varka 4. The air smelled of pine and rain, and the wind carried whispers through the branches. He crouched down, pressed his hand into the soil, and felt the same hum he had felt out there, the pulse of life beneath everything. He smiled quietly to himself. Humanity had reached the stars, built empires, and lost its roots along the way. But for the first time, he believed that the stars could remember Earth through him. He closed his eyes and heard the voices of his former teammates, laughing, speaking, learning. The forest on Varka 4 had changed them all. Perhaps, somewhere deep in that alien wilderness, their shelters still stood, half swallowed by moss, and the glowing mushrooms still marked the mound where gratitude was buried. Perhaps the Predator still watched the horizon for the skyship that had taken its strange companions away. Aaron rose and looked toward the sunset. The sky burned orange and gold, the same colors as the creature's eyes. He whispered quietly, almost to himself, "Survival isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of understanding." Then he turned away, walking deeper into the trees. The forest greeted him with wind and birdsong, and as the light faded, the world seemed to fold around him, not as a challenge, but as a home. The lesson of Varka 4 lived on, not as a memory, but as a truth, that the strongest species are not those who conquer, but those who remember how to listen.